Okay, good morning. I'd like to call the February 10th, 2025 meeting of the Board of Directors of the El Dorado Irrigation District to order. Roll call, please.
Directors Penn, Mansfield, Dwyer, Anzini, and Day present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Board Clerk Sullivan present.
Thank you. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Chuck, you want to lead us? Thank you. I guess I could have had a moment of silence for the Chiefs, but oh well. Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda? So moved. Thank you, Alan. Director Day, second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Director Mansfield. Any board comment on the agenda? Any public comment on the adoption of the agenda?
If members of the public would like to address the board on the adoption of today's agenda, please refer to the instructions on page 2. Brian, are you good? President Dwyer, does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on the adoption of today's agenda, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Mansfield. I believe that we are ready for the vote.
Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Moving to General Manager's Employee Recognition and Communication.
None today.
Thank you. We'll now open for public comment for items that are not on the agenda.
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Dwyer, does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Thank you. Moving on to communications. General Manager.
Nothing to report.
Wow. Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything in communications to report?
None today, thank you.
Thank you. And my fellow members of the board, any comments, communication, activities, birthdays? Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to the consent calendar.
So we didn't want to mention that yesterday. Saturday.
That's far enough away, so it doesn't count.
Big party next year.
Consent calendar. I believe Director Anzini, did you want?
Yes, I would like item 5 pulled on technology.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar minus item number 5?
Yes, I'll move approval of items except for 5.
Okay, thank you. Director Anzini made the motion, Director Day the second. Are there any other board comments on the consent calendar? Okay, any public comment on the consent calendar?
If members of the public would like to address the board on the approval of today's consent calendar, please refer to the instructions on page 2. President Dwyer, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the approval of the consent calendar, with consent calendar item number 5 being removed and the rest of the consent calendar Moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Day. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll address consent calendar item number 5.
Good morning, Board. Aaron Kennedy, your IT Director, for consent calendar item, although I now pulled from it.
Yes.
So, Director Anzini?
Yeah. I have a question regarding the 3-year contract.
Yes.
Okay, is this a renewal of a contract?
Yes, ma'am. So we,
Because it really didn't say that on here, did it? I looked.
I don't know if that was clear enough.
Okay.
But yes, we've been using Infotech for, well, at least 12 years, since before I came on. The previous IT Director was using it.
Okay.
The amounts for their 3-year contracts were below 100,000 for the previous years. This time through, they have raised their rates enough that it now goes above 100,000 for what we're using.
So I kind of pulled it a little bit so that we have new members on the board and might want to understand a little bit more of what this particular membership includes. And I know it's here, but it's not clearly defined.
Sure.
So what does it provide?
So the membership to Infotech Research Group, what they provide, quite a plethora of items. What we tend to use them for is a lot on research and development. So while IT staff is very skilled at what we do, we don't necessarily have enough time to look at every application that's out there. So when we get a request, for example, we want a new version of a software. What applications are out there? What are other agencies using? How do they use it? So that then we can take that information, take it down and say, okay, what then applies to El Dorado Irrigation District, as opposed to just looking at what's available, for lack of a better word, the advertisements of a software, what it can do. We use Infotech Research Group to say, what does it actually do? What does it do for your other members? How are they using that software? To get past what, the fluff, really.
Does it provide discounts if we choose an application, if you choose
Right.
an application to make life easier for your tech?
No, and on purpose, so that they don't have any financial stake in any of the software they might recommend. So again, they don't actually provide the recommendations, they provide the research. We've looked at, for example, if we were looking at, and which we use them for, Microsoft Office 365, and we wanted somebody to help us develop that. What other software that would connect to that to make it work for us? There's 15, 20 different major manufacturers out there that do that. We say we're looking for it to help us with A, B, and C. They go and come back with research and the documentation that says, here's how other water districts have used that particular software. Here's where they've used this piece of software and this piece of software, so then we can narrow it down to a couple of choices that then would make sense for us. We would then use a proof of concept, just make a decision on that software. That's one of the things that they do provide for us.
And I have last question, and then I'll just, we'll move approval. But the question I have, this is $33,000 a year. And I guess my question regarding, I would think that's a bit expensive for you to contact and say, what would you use? And I know your example was very, very simple, but the issue on networking, security, and applications that within our own network, is this beneficial to us?
Yes.
$33,000 a year.
So one of the other services that they then also provide is what they call contract renewal and review services.
We have George on the end here.
He's an exact replacement.
I'm sorry.
For sure.
No, he's not sorry. It's my apologies.
You just hit this volume button.
Well, thanks.
The young guy can help you.
The horn. All right.
I'm enjoying the show.
So the answer, again, I'm sorry we're distracted.
No. So for example, one of the things they also provide, which had
Let's
got
just,
to.
1 minute.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Got it?
All right. So one of the other pieces is contract renewal review. So they will look at when we go out to say, we're looking to renew a piece of software, or even when we're purchasing one, here's what other members have actually got for their discounts. So that when we go and say, we're looking to renew, for example, a Cisco SmartNet, which will be coming up soon. What are other agency discounts getting? Is it better to use the Sourcewell contracts or the pieces, or is it better to go out to bid because they are doing better discounts right now? So we have, for example, seen where they had showed us, yeah, what you would normally have done would have cost you $15,000 to $20,000 per year for that software. If you go this route, you can save that money. So
Okay.
they do also save us money as far as on the contract renewals. Now, they
Okay.
do that over and over again. Eventually, you can't save anymore because we've got the best prices, but they do validate them.
Okay.
Yes.
Aaron, I have a question.
Sure.
This is a firm fixed price?
For this particular, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no additional
Then
change.
it sounds like from what you're describing, maybe a task order contract might be more appropriate.
I'm not familiar.
On an as-needed basis?
Yeah, yeah. So when a new software opportunity comes up, then say, okay, evaluate this one.
They don't operate that way. What we do is we actually meet monthly, or I meet with them monthly. We talk about other things that are coming online, additional resources that they do in addition to those two major ones that we brought up, is they also help us basically with the business of IT. How are we operating? One other service we've used them for recently was we are adjusting how we do our help desk. So how can we make our help desk more efficient?
Okay.
How can we answer questions? So there's 20 different things we use. Those are just the major ones that we use that have some type of hard monetary value that we can show a reason for using them. They also will help us with our documentation. For example, we have to present, and it just came up from our finance, it's the annual audit. How's our documents look? We use them to review our standard operating procedures, our thing, and go, hey, here's a better way to write this to make it more effective or to make it look better for your auditors, how to clean it up. So there's a lot we do throughout the year. We just highlighted a couple, 2 or 3 of them.
Got it. Yeah.
Did you move to?
I'm moving approval.
Okay. Looking for a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Director Mansfield. Any other board comment on consent item number 5? Is there any public comment on consent item number 5?
If members of the public would like to address the board on consent calendar item number 5, please refer to page 2 for instructions. President Dwyer, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on consent calendar item number 5. Option 1, moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Mansfield. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Yes, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, vote in aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, moving on to information items. We get to have our plan for our centennial, so please proceed. I guess I should, now on center stage.
Good morning. Good morning, President Dwyer, members of the board, members of the public who may be tuning in, I hope. My name is Jesse Sach, your communications manager, and I am pleased to be here. As you can see, this is the 2025 Centennial Communications Overview. High-level view at what we're doing throughout this year. Want to hit the real major things. We have a load of things planned, but this should give you a kind of an idea of what we're doing. Next slide. Yeah, our objective is simple. Celebrate a century of service with the community throughout the year. It's a simple thing, but we have so many things going on. As I've been working on researching all of the things that El Dorado Irrigation has done over the past century, that has become a very rich area for us to share. So our focus areas are broadly highlight historical milestones, of course, engage the community, and showcase EID's contributions both in the past and our vision for the future. Next slide, please. We've decided to organize around monthly themes that seemed reasonable. We have a number of things that we do here at the district. January, it made sense to be the beginnings in the early history. February, where we're at now, water resources development. March, environmental stewardship. April, agricultural support. May, community engagement and education. June, technological advancements, and there have been many. July, in summer, we'll see legal and policy milestones. Looking forward to that one. August, we have challenges and overcoming adversity, and we have had a number of those things. September, we'll see water quality and treatment also includes, obviously, wastewater treatment and things like that. October, we'll see infrastructure development. November, partnerships and collaborations. And December, we will look to the future. In October, that infrastructure development, we'll see a little bit later in this relatively short presentation, that's our anniversary month. So we're moving towards that time and hope to have a good event. Next slide.
That'll also kind of line up with our budget activities and the capital improvement plan, won't it? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Just want to go over public engagement. So just give you a real broad overview of what we're kind of doing and where we're going. Our platforms are the EID website. That's eid.org/100. Simple as that. That is our hub for information, all information about the history and what we've been doing the past 100 years. And as I go through the months, the information adds. All right? We use our social media channels extensively, and we will continue to do that. So we use X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Nextdoor has been a wonderful way to reach out to our community as well.
I'd encourage my fellow board members as I try to like things as they come up from Jesse and the staff. I think I'd like if all of you could do that same thing. It spreads the word and gets it out to all of your contacts, and that's the idea, is make a big network of information out there.
I couldn't have designed that comment better, President Dwyer. Thank you. We also use the waterfront newsletters. These have this old technology of sending out a newsletter in folks' bills has been remarkably powerful. People look at it increasingly all the time. So we get comments, we get lots of feedback based upon the articles we put there. We'll also have video, and we'll share them on those same platforms, because this is an outstanding way to actually increase our reach. So we'll use YouTube, we'll use the same social platforms, we'll use stories that are not expressly for long-form video, but we'll use shorter-form video in those types of social channels. And we'll, of course, collaborate with local media like the Mountain Democrat. What are our goals? Simply, can you go back just one? Thank you, Mike. Keep the community informed and involved, and encourage event participation as we get closer to that event. Next slide, please. So the next few slides, you're going to see just a couple of examples of how we're putting information out. I'd like to show you first how we started this year off with this young man up here who talked a little bit about a century of service and how we honored the past. So,
Thank you for photoshopping that picture.
no Photoshop needed. Throughout the year, Jim has columns. He talks about things. We will include information about the centennial. We'll include centennial activities in separate releases and separate columns as well. Next slide, please. Okay, what you're seeing here is a picture on the right of the EID 100 page. And on the left, you'll see I just took screenshots of our rotating banner that we have on the front page when you get there. We have currently 2 that kind of showcase, hey, there's this. We'll change that over the year and continually add information there. They click on that, go to the 100 page, and they'll be able to get all of the information that they've been receiving, or if they're on social channels, they'll see that, they'll go here, they'll be able to get that rich information. Next slide, please. All right, the next couple of slides are all about social. So you'll see these are some examples from our Facebook page. Over January, we did, I think it was 12 to 14 posts, basically Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sometimes we'll have a little bit more, sometimes we'll have a little bit less. We're looking to have evocative pictures. We're looking to tell a story that follows a narrative arc throughout that month. I'd like to pause here just for a moment and say I'm giving this presentation, but I'd like to highlight Karen Cross, who is my colleague in communications, and without her, none of this could look as simple as it sometimes does. So I'd like to really call her out from social media work that she does, website work. It is without doubt integral to my what we do. Next slide. This is Nextdoor. So we're mirroring the same information. Nextdoor is an interesting platform. It gives us an opportunity to send messages to everyone who happens to be a Nextdoor member. For us, it's something like 80,000 plus members, representing about 40,000 plus households. That's good. That's lovely, and I'm glad to see that from the metrics, in January, we reached at least 50,000 screens.
Wow.
And quite frankly, that's huge. To me, I'm grateful for that kind of number. So thank you. Thank you, Director Enzini. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk briefly about the signature event. So it's going to be in October. We're still we're figuring out exactly what day. The day of our anniversary is October 5th. It's unlikely to be on October 5th, but we're going to be right in that range, something that makes the most sense for staff, for the community, and so forth. So we're going to have a public ceremony. It's a celebration. We're going to have interactive displays showcasing all of those themes. We'll have guest speakers on EID's legacy and its future vision, and historical displays and artifacts and photographs. Additional activities, we'll have presentation about EID's current infrastructure and services, and opportunities for public engagement. Next.
Jesse,
slide.
do we have
Yes.
an idea about a location? Are we going to do it on site
District
here?
headquarters. We're leaning toward district headquarters, yeah.
We have a fall festival, pumpkin carving, bean pie.
I like what,
Hey, you
don't sing, oh my goodness. Don't get me started, that sounds good. Sure.
Jesse,
Yeah.
does it make sense to maybe have a sub party up at the Sly Park Reservoir where we have that, I guess, what kind of room do you call it? We've had some workshops there.
Yeah, the
the
event
events?
center, it's pretty small.
Yeah, but if
But-
it's in October, it's probably going to be a beautiful time. And it's just an idea because you're on the site, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm an East Bay Mud
Yeah.
pensioner, and I went to East Bay Mud's 100-year anniversary, and they had it on Pardee.
Right.
So they did it at their headquarters, and it was wonderful, and there was all kinds of people there. There was over 150 people. And they had a little historical museum there with rocks and dinosaur bones and stuff like that.
Thank you. All right, next slide. The event timeline, we're in the thick of things right now, just so you know. We're continuing to develop our strategies for that specific event. By mid-2025, we anticipate finalizing event logistics and materials. In October, of course, we'll host that lovely event, and we'll be widely disseminating information about it so as many people as possible can come. Next slide, please. All right, it was interesting to me. I wanted to bring this up. This is the top 11 board members by tenure. So in the first century of EID, 66 people have given time, energy, and dedication to serve their community on the EID board. And we have a recent board member, George Osborne, was there 23 years. And I'd like to point out, coming in 11th place, at Hey. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Next.
Notice we had to extend it to 11,
I know.
just not the top 10.
You're working with a time-space continuum here?
So this and the next slide will just be a couple of pictures, but this is truly a century of service. So join us, your constituents, spread the word. We're celebrating 100 years of extraordinary things, and we're really proud of that. So stay updated, eid.org/100, super simple to get that. Like the Facebook page, follow the Instagram page. We have an Instagram page. It's getting off the ground. We have X, but please be check it out. I think my picture there is unfortunate. There's a wonderful little men wanted sign for, I believe it's for construction of Medley Lakes, and they were asking, and they would provide the transportation up there, but I think it was something like 35 cents, 32.5 cents per hour. So EID employees have been doing this from the beginning, dedicated hugely, and we're hoping to really examine that over this year. Last slide.
Oh, before you move on, remember we're replacing Silver Lake Dam because it's timber crib? You can see it.
There it is. Yeah. Okay, final slide I have for you is just, here's the picture of Sly Park Dam construction on the left there. It's looking east. And down the bottom right, you'll see this is it filling. And on the top, we had a Western Union telegram from then Vice President Nixon congratulating us on this extraordinary thing. That is all I have for you. Do you have any questions, or can I? Please.
Put my microphone on for Jennifer. Somebody gave me as a gift, and he's a historian. He's lived in Placerville. He's an attorney named Kirk Smith. Okay, but he gave me a copy of the East Bay, not East Bay, El Dorado Water District bond that they were selling to fund. So he has this information. It might be valuable, but I have a copy of it, and it's kind of unique because
love
it
to
was
see that.
1925
Yeah, I'd love
or
to see
24. So, just an idea. That,
Cash it in.
no, mine's paper.
You know,
Paper
I
little-
hope it's paid off.
just for anybody what needs to know. I'll get it and I'll
Thank you.
give you a copy of it.
But thank you, Jesse, and I'm looking forward to it a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. It might be interesting to have a future informational items to see what sort of uptick in followers and interactions we get through your various social media ventures because of this added outreach, maybe this time next year or something. Yeah.
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you, Jesse. A couple things. One, I would request that you also add Blue Sky, as people are looking for an alternative to X, and that seems to be the up-and-coming one, and you can probably mirror that stuff. And, I noted that you're looking at doing community forums, and I'd love to see some before October, just do a series of those. And I know that our tours were well subscribed, so if we can do more tours, I would really love to see that, just to give people the opportunity to go, behind the curtain. And then finally, kind of working off the bond that Kirk Smith has, I am sure somewhere, many places in this county, people have stuff. So it may be in the waterfront, just say, do you have something in your, back in the trunk, in the attic that might be of, interest to the rest of the community?
That is a great recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more. I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
In your series of monthly progress on PR for this, one of the things, and it's been in the back of my mind for several years, that the connection between our high schoolers is really the education. It's very, very important. And my interest is in how do we connect with maybe the engineers coming up with a high school project, you know, or a tech project, or an environmental project that they can participate and they can get involved with this. I know it's going to take a lot of work to do that. However, it's beneficial because these people will be living here 50 years from now and remembering how important El Dorado Irrigation District is for their water resources.
Certainly, fabulous comment. We already engage with some of those school-aged constituencies through things like Ag Day and so forth. But by kind of retooling that a little bit, showing off a little bit more, you know, the things that we've been doing over the past century, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my idea, and I've seen it before in other AWWA conferences and at East Bay Mud, we used to do it, where high school students develop their own dam project. And they would love it.
I love that. I love
And
the
how the
title.
water goes down the hill. Maybe like the mission that we do with fourth grade, right?
Yeah, fabulous.
Right.
Thank you.
And thank you, Director Anzini.
Just one comment. Great ideas. We'll do our best. Please remember, we have only 2 people in communications. So, but we'll do our best. Thank you.
Well, another wonderful idea to help you, Jesse, is building on Director Penn's comments about the tours, maybe somehow arranging individual events that focus on our 5 business areas. So just a suggestion. I know it's Monday morning quarterbacking, if you can pardon the puns, and after yesterday. Yeah,
Very much
Just an idea.
appreciated. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your support.
excellent presentation, and I know you put in a lot of work and appreciate everything you and Karen do.
Thank you.
Is there any other board comment? Is there any public comment on this information item?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item 7, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Dwyer does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 7. I believe we're ready to move on to information item number 8.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to information item number 8. Brian? Oh, there you are.
Good morning,
Good morning.
President Dwyer and members of the board. Boy, that's going to be a hard presentation to follow. Really nicely done by Jesse. Hopefully you're not getting tired of me yet. This is, I think, the 3rd meeting in a row. So I'm here today to kind of as a follow-on to some of the introductory presentations that I've been giving. Today's presentation will focus on the law of California water rights and a summary of the district's water rights. Hopefully, I will just warn you in advance, this presentation is lengthy. I'm going to try and move through it quickly, but I welcome any questions or comments as we go through it. Hopefully, you'll find it slightly less boring than some of the other topics that we've covered, like Robert's Rules of Order, but I think this is a fascinating one, and you know, I think that you'll agree with me. So as an overview today, I'm going to kind of briefly summarize, sort of give you the California Water Rights 101 presentation. I'm then going to summarize the district's water rights portfolio and what we have to work with. And then to kind of put all of that in context, I'm going to talk a little bit about supply and demand management, how we rely on our water rights to meet to meet our demands. And then I'm going to wrap up with a brief discussion on some of the challenges and opportunities that the district faces in light of its water rights portfolio and the background that I gave on water rights. So let's move along. Just a brief, this is just a kind of, I'm likely going to use acronyms as we go through this. So this is just a informational slide here to show some of the acronyms that I may use. Next slide. So beginning with our 101 presentation, there are a couple of high-level points that I want to mention. In California, all water belongs to the people of the state, and therefore the right to use water is just that. It is a right to use it. It is not a right to physically own the water itself. This is often referred to as a usufructuary right, meaning you have a right to use the water, you don't own the water itself. Okay? There are two main classifications or types of water rights in California. These are riparian and appropriative rights, and I'm going to talk in detail about each one of these. There is a third category that I'm not going to talk about today, and that is the law of groundwater. Mostly because, number one, it's very complicated. It would make this presentation much longer, and we don't rely on it as a source to meet our customer demands. So be grateful for that because, you know, especially in recent times with the adoption of the statewide Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, it's a complicated area to have to deal with, and a lot of our partner agencies are doing just that. So I'll focus today on the law of surface water rights. Next slide. So riparian rights, what are they? Riparian rights are rights that are held by landowners where water runs through or adjacent to their property. This right is inherent in the ownership of the land itself. And so if you are riparian, meaning you are adjacent to a river or stream that flows across or past your property, then you have an inherent right to use water as a riparian user. Riparian rights are for the reasonable, beneficial use of water, and they're correlative to all other riparian users on that stream. So you don't have, if you are a riparian right holder, you don't have a priority over any other riparian holder. Your rights are correlative to all of the other right holders on that stream. California adopted go back one slide, to the riparian rights doctrine in very, very early, shortly after the formation of the state. I believe they adopted it in 1850 is my recollection. The riparian rights is the sort of prevailing system of water rights in the eastern United States, where water is relatively prevalent and scarcity is rare, okay? If you'll go to the next slide, please. If there's one thing that I think all of us know about California, it is that water is not prevalent across the landscape, and scarcity is not rare, it's frequent. So this is just a slide that demonstrates on the left where the water exists in the state, the bluer and greener colors being those that indicate water resources are abundant, the red and yellow where they're not abundant. On the right, it's a depiction of the state's population density, with the red being population is more dense and the green being less dense. And as you can see, the two do not, they don't work, they don't overlap precisely. The water exists where, generally speaking, where the people are not, and the people exist, generally speaking, where the water is not. Which is why in the early 1850s, California adopted not just the riparian rights doctrine, but one of appropriative rights as well. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. This doctrine in California arose in a dispute between miners in 1855, in which one miner in Nevada County diverted essentially all of the water in a small stream to supply water to its mining operation. And then subsequently, another miner established a mining operation downstream. And that miner wasn't receiving enough water to meet their demands. And they said, hey, you can't take all that water up there. I need some too. This dispute went to the Supreme Court. Next slide, please. And the Supreme Court it used a bunch of Latin to basically, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but it essentially said, as between two surface water appropriators, the one who is first in time has the first right. This doctrine was subsequently codified in the Civil Code, and it says, as between appropriators, the one first in time is the first in right. This is the doctrine known as prior appropriation. And it is prevalent across the western United States where scarcity is common. Next slide, please. So here are some basic principles of appropriative rights. As we just said, first in time, first in right. This is prior appropriation. They are established by the beneficial use of the water. Beneficial uses are defined by statute, but they include things like domestic purposes, irrigation, power, etc. They are not correlative, unlike the riparian rights doctrine where everyone has an equal right to use of the water so long as the water is used for reasonable beneficial use. In the appropriative rights system in which prior appropriation applies, the prevailing rule or the junior priority holders must yield entirely to the senior to satisfy the senior demands that exist on the same stream system. So as I said, this is the prevailing rule in more arid states. It seems harsh that our system would be, so one might ask, well, why would we adopt a system that entirely cuts off junior users in order to supply water to senior users? And the answer is really to provide certainty. As I said, this is the doctrine that is prevalent in every state in the American West. And it was adopted because scarcity in the American West is the norm. There's just not enough water all the time to supply all of the demands. And so rather than a system in which water supply is abundant and scarcity is rare, it's easy in that circumstance to say, okay, well, when it happens, that is scarcity and the lack of water, then we'll all kind of figure it out together. But in a geographic location such as we are, where there's always not enough water to go around, it's important to know exactly where you stand in order to be able to develop, in order to be able to plan for the future, and develop your water supplies. And that's why it is so commonly adopted in the American West. I'm sorry. Let me just finish up that last a couple last points here. The water rights are limited to the amount historically used. So if you have a water right for X amount, you can't increase beyond X amount without establishing a new right. And that new right would be established with a later priority date. Okay? They are use it or lose it. You can lose a right due to its non-use for a statutory period that's defined as 5 years. And finally, just a note that water rights are considered transferable. They are, even though I said that they are usufructuary or they're the rights to use the water, they are considered property rights, and therefore they're fungible as commodities are. I'm going to talk more about transfers in particular later in the presentation.
With regards to the use it or lose it, if you're only using a portion of it, does your water right eventually become curtailed down to the amount you're using?
Well, curtailed is not the right terminology, and this is where California water rights get very, very complicated. But yes, depending on the kind of right and the non-use, you can lose some part of your right for non-use. So if you establish a water right for 100 acre feet, but you go for a decade of only using less than that, then you are at risk of losing that. Now, there are exceptions here. The state law recognizes that, particularly for domestic purposes, municipal, that kind of thing, that municipalities grow over time, and therefore you will build into your right. So if you're a EID, for example, and you have a right for, say, 17,000 acre feet, well, even though you might not be using the full face value of that immediately, you have time to grow into it without fear of losing that right. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. In 1914, the state legislature enacted the Water Commission Act. This is a system. It established a system whereby in order to obtain a water right, one had to follow a certain process, and it established what is known today as the State Water Resources Control Board as a state agency to oversee the process of obtaining water rights. This is why in you very often hear water rights referred to as either pre-1914 rights, meaning those rights that were established before the Water Commission Act was enacted, and then post-1914, or what are more frequently called permit or licensed rights. Okay, they're permitted or licensed because the process established under the Water Commission Act required someone wanting to establish a water right to file an application with what is now known as the State Water Resources Control Board, and then obtain a permit to use the right, which eventually can be transformed into a license, something that's considered more permanent. Okay, the State Water Board, besides administering the process of overseeing the establishment of water rights, it also has an ongoing responsibility to monitor the use and, in certain circumstances, to take actions against water right holders. And the district submits annual reports for all of its water rights to the State Water Resources Control Board. Next slide, please. So here's a few important characteristics of a water right. As I mentioned, because of the prior appropriation doctrine, an appropriated right has a priority date. It has a purpose of use, domestic, irrigation, power, etc. A place of use. For EID, the place of use is generally our service territory or portions thereof. A water right has a point of diversion and a season of diversion. These are just some of the characteristics that define a water right. The picture shown on the right is just sort of the cover page of one of the district's reports. As I mentioned, the district files annual reports with the State Water Resources Control Board. This is a tremendous, that picture makes it look like, oh, it's just a simple report. They are not simple. They're highly complicated. They require a lot of data and analysis to compile, and the district has a lot of water rights. So we just completed our annual filing, and I want to just shout out to district staff that work really, really hard to get these filed. In particular, Justine Turman, who really has along with Brian Deason and others here at the district, really transformed and made really efficient the process for filing these water rights. So kudos to Justine and the rest of the gang. Once established, there are some sort of rules that apply that go beyond just those that we've covered today. One of the rules is called reasonable use or the reasonable use doctrine. Another I'll talk about next is the public trust doctrine. But reasonable use was established as a constitutional amendment in 1928. What happened in the early 20s was that we have these two systems of surface water rights, riparian and appropriate, and they came to a clash in the early 1920s when a riparian landowner in the San Joaquin Valley relied on surface water runoff in the spring that would come down and flood all these sloughs and channels in the lower San Joaquin Valley, and thereby, this particular riparian owner relied on the flood flows to essentially irrigate pastures and water cattle. The cattle would go into all these channels and sloughs to feed and so forth. Later in time, Southern California Edison constructed a dam on the upper San Joaquin, which when it was filling was preventing some of those flood flows from going downstream and supplying all this passive irrigated pasture land. And the riparian owner sued to enjoin the dam owner, Southern California Edison, from appropriating the water that this riparian owner relied upon. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court in a case called Herminghaus, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the riparian. The Supreme Court said, as between riparian and appropriators, essentially the riparian owner is senior, right, or has a higher priority on the right than the appropriation, which was established later in time. Well, as you can imagine, Southern California Edison had just invested a lot in constructing a hydropower facility and water supply facility in the upper San Joaquin. And so that case didn't really sit very well. What happened was, a couple of years later, is that the state enacted an amendment to the Constitution, which says that it's now the policy of the state that the waters of the state be put to beneficial use to the fullest extent of which they are capable, and that, and here's the important part, the waste or unreasonable use or unreasonable method of use must be prevented. And so what this really said was, it's not reasonable that someone in the lower San Joaquin requires the entire runoff of the stream in order to supply water to their cattle, when there are lots of competing demands, such as the need for hydropower, the need for water supply storage, and those kinds of things. So this reasonable use doctrine was foundational in, and continues to be a part of our water rights system. 1928 is when Article 10, Section 2 was added.
Yeah, that's when water companies had great lawyers.
My, how times have changed. The next slide, please. Yeah, yeah. Another doctrine widely applied to water rights, which, like the prior one, arose from a Supreme Court ruling, is the doctrine called the public trust doctrine. This case arose, many of you might recall that in the 1980s, Los Angeles Department of Water Resources was diverting a lot of water from the Eastern Sierra in order to supply water to Southern California. That had a dramatic effect on the lake level in Mono Lake, and it created some problems with species that were uniquely found in that area, the lowering of the water. And so National Audubon Society filed a lawsuit against LADWP. It went to the California Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, interpreting sort of some very old legal concepts that arise from Roman law, if you can believe it, said, hey, you know what? When it comes to navigable waters, the state has a trust responsibility to ensure that diverters are not unreasonably impacting these public trust resources, such as wildlife and other in-stream beneficial uses. And so as a result of that case, the National Audubon Society case, the state has an ongoing responsibility, and it exercises this responsibility through the State Water Resources Control Board, to balance the public value in diverting water for beneficial use against the trust resources such as fish, wildlife, and in-stream beneficial uses. Next, please.
Quick question, and maybe you said it and I missed it, but do the reasonable use doctrine and the public trust doctrine affect both pre-1914 and post-1914?
Oh, that's such a good question, because the State Water Resources Control Board, as I mentioned, was its predecessor, but the agency was created by the Water Commission Act in 1914, and rights that were established prior to that statute are not subject to it. And so there have been cases litigated to say, well, how much jurisdiction does the State Water Resources Control Board really have over pre-1914 water rights? It's complicated. We don't have time for me to go into it, and frankly, I don't remember, what the state of the law is precisely on that point. But no, the State Water Resources Control Board does not regulate pre-1914 water rights. But yes, the State Water Resources Control Board has a responsibility to ensure that that water is not wasted or used unreasonably. And yes, the State Water Resources Control Board has an ongoing responsibility with regard to public trust. So it's complicated, and it would, I'm sure, the answer to your question would depend on the facts, but it is certain that the State Water Board has some inherent authorities that extend beyond just those that it regulates under permits and licenses issued after 1914.
Brian, I think definitions are always important. Navigable water, does that mean by a container ship or a kayak?
Okay. Yeah, that is a very good question.
And fluctuating.
Yeah, and it is a complicated one because though in the context of water rights and the public trust doctrine, the term navigable has been utilized for a long, long time. As I said, the public trust doctrine originates in Roman law. So, so that term, under that context, is broadly construed. Now, this is complicated because the navigable waters, the term navigable waters, is also a term that is used in the Clean Water Act to define which waters are subject to federal regulation for pollution control. And the statute, the Clean Water Act, does not define what navigable waters are, except to say that they are waters of the United States. And so it is left to the executive branch through the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to define what are waters of the United States. And it has done so many, many times. In fact, with each new federal administration, it redefines what constitutes waters of the United States. So this has been an area of the law heavily litigated. There have been multiple Supreme Court cases, as recently as 2023, in a case called Sackett versus Environmental Protection Agency, that have tried to put sideboards interpreting the Clean Water Act, that have tried to put sideboards on what it means. But that is an area that is complicated, and so is a bit of a sticky wicket there.
In practice, I've in the agricultural setting, I've been told that a mud puddle is waters of the U.S. a time or two. So,
I am not surprised. I am not surprised. We frequently deal with this issue when we have construction projects, for example, flume replacement or canal work that crosses a stream. Is it waters of the United States if it's just an ephemeral stream? And we're going to be doing work in there. Do we have to get a permit from the federal government to conduct that work? Or what about if it's an irrigation canal? Does the canal constitute waters of the United States if it's constructed by man but is linked to, takes water from and returns water to navigable water? So it's very complicated, and there's a lot of questions there. Okay, so and then the last of these general principles that I wanted to highlight for the board is the topic of area and county of origin protections. These are statutory creations. The legislature has decided, particularly when the state and federal water projects were being constructed, and water was largely being exported from north to south, the state legislature said, hey, we recognize that in the areas where water originates, there ought to be some protections for the use of water in those areas as they develop over time. And so what we have here are two statutes, County of Origin Statute and Watershed of Origin Statute, that provide essentially those protections. And then there's and so the concept is generally referred to as area of origin. And basically what it says is that that the rights necessary to meet demands in the future in areas where the water originates are protected and have a priority over water that's exported out of the areas of origin. Now, that sounds logical and intuitive, and it has only been tested a few times, and it has not been interpreted, largely, it has not been interpreted by the courts to really provide a lot of protection to the areas of origin. This will be an area of ongoing future litigation, I'm certain.
So Owens Lake, is that an example?
Not, well, potentially. The issue there with Owens Lake really is more about the public trust, and because there's not, as you might imagine, there's not a ton of demand in the lower Owens Valley to meet demands there locally, as compared with the demands to export that water. So I'm not aware of the area of origin statute being asserted to try and protect the rights of ag, for example, in the lower Owens River Valley. But it would be more of a public trust responsibility there to balance the needs of making sure that that community has water to meet its needs versus Southern California. Okay, next slide, please. So to recap our summary of California water law, water belongs to the state, or the people of the state, rather. A water right is merely the right to use the water. The amount is defined by the beneficial use, and appropriative rights have priority vis-a-vis one another. They are not correlative like riparian rights. They are transferable, and again, I will talk in more detail about that, and they're subject to forfeiture for non-use. All water rights are limited to the reasonable amount and method of diverting the water, and all rights are subject to this public trust balancing that we've talked about. Finally, there are protections for the areas of origin, and the State Water Resources Control Board regulates the administration of water rights in California today. Now, before I move on to the district's water rights, I did want to just briefly touch on, if you go to the next slide here, because this has been much in the news lately. Yeah, next slide. The issue of federal water projects and how they interact with state law. So the most notable federal project that we interface with on a regular basis is the Central Valley Project, which is owned and operated by the federal government through the United States Bureau of Reclamation. And the Reclamation Act of 1906 and subsequent Supreme Court case law says the Bureau must adhere to state water laws when operating its federal projects unless Congress has explicitly stated otherwise. Okay, what does that mean? Well, there are instances in which Congress has specifically stated that certain federal laws will preempt state laws on that topic. A good example here is the Federal Endangered Species Act, right? The Congress has enacted the Federal Endangered Species Act, and the Bureau of Reclamation must adhere to it. But because Congress has explicitly enacted that particular statute, courts have ruled that the state law equivalent is preempted, and so the Bureau of Reclamation does not have to comply with the State Endangered Species Act, okay? But Congress has not explicitly spoken as it relates to water rights and water rights priority, and therefore the Bureau of Reclamation must adhere to state water law with regard to the water rights system. What does that mean? Well, in the case of the Central Valley Project, which was constructed, somebody help me out here, in the 1940s, the point is that they are a junior water right holder to many of the water right holders in the state, which established appropriative rights much earlier than the Central Valley Project was constructed. So that will matter in terms of when there is a shortage, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I did just want to mention a note, since there's been a lot of talk lately about operation of the federal Central Valley Project. Oops, can you go to the next slide? So moving from the summary of California Water Rights Law 101 now to an overview of the district's water rights. We're going to go kind of quick here through the next few slides, next slide. The district's water rights the district's earliest rights were established during the mining era in the 1850s, and they were established by predecessors to EID. But you can see here, I've just listed some of the rights that the district relies upon today with their associated priority date, and you can see that these are some of the oldest water rights in the state of California. So very, very valuable. Okay, next slide, please. Now here's this table is sort of simplifies our water rights portfolio in terms of the where we utilize the water or where we divert the water. So we have pre-1914 rights on the South Fork American River. We have water rights that are located in Sly Park Reservoir. And then we have an amalgamation, if you will, of various water rights that we utilize at Folsom, including permitted and licensed rights, and also pre-1914 rights. Next slide, please. Here's just we're going to run through quickly some pictures of the sources from which our water rights are derived. So here's Lake Aloha, Echo Lake, Caples Lake, Silver Lake, Sly Park, and finally Folsom Reservoir, to kind of depict visually where the water is originates and or diverted from. This is maybe a dated picture, because you can see that on the right-hand side of the picture, there's a roadway, which, if I'm not mistaken, no longer exists and has been replaced by a very large spillway. Next slide, please. This is a table that I pulled directly from the district's current urban water management plan. And this table just shows visually the supply source that we just talked about, the maximum face value of the rights associated with those sources, and then how much water is available to us in a normal year versus a dry year, or a single dry year, versus multiple dry years. And as you can see, I'm not going to highlight any of the numbers in particular, but face value of all of the sources at approximately 88,000 acre feet annually, but in multiple dry years, that amount would diminish fairly significantly down to about 56,000 acre feet per year. Next slide, please. This is just some pie graphs that show our supply sources grouped by color here, and three primary categories, those being the South Fork American River in blue, the rights from Sly Park Reservoir in yellow, and then the rights that we take from Folsom Reservoir in green. And so in a normal year, single dry year, and multiple dry years, these are the supply source amounts available to us. Next slide, please. In terms of how we meet our demand, this is kind of, these are the same charts, but instead of showing how much is available from each supply, it's how much we have utilized in recent years from each supply, depending on the kind of year. So the point here that I wanted to highlight for you was how important, if you look at the normal year and the single dry year, Sly Park Reservoir is the district's water supply workhorse, okay? In multiple dry years, water from the South Fork American River becomes even more valuable to us, because water supply sources for Sly Park really start to fall off for us. And we can't meet all of our demand from Sly Park alone currently, we can't meet all of the demand on the South Fork American side alone with that treatment plant. So we move some of that South Fork American River water down to Sly Park to help us with that. So just kind of an informative, I think, overview. Next slide, please. So that was kind of a summary of the district's water and in context of how we meet our demands. Next, I want to just talk a little bit to you about challenges and opportunities associated with our water rights portfolio. So you can see, and this is a picture of, again, this is a somewhat dated picture of Folsom Reservoir, because it's missing the large emergency spillway channel. But I imagine, I haven't been down to Folsom recently, I imagine Folsom probably looks something similar to this right now, meaning the supply in Folsom Reservoir is really about as much as it could be given its restrictions to maintain space for flood control. So if you go to the next slide, this is what Folsom Reservoir looked like in January of 2014, and all of us, I'm sure, remember it. It was unprecedented, and it caused a lot of problems for meeting water supply demands, not just in our region, but in the state. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges then is, what do you do when supplies are so constrained as they were in years like 2014 and 2015? Well, this is a graph, and I know it's busy, and I'm sorry about that, but let me just take a minute, because I think this is illustrative of how the state Water Resources Control Board attempts to try and meet the demands based on water rights priority when there's a scarcity. So the y-axis here is the amount of water in cubic feet per second that the amount of demand, if you will, from water rights holders, and then the x-axis on the bottom is moving through time in a period from March to, it looks like, September. So if you focus just on the big block colors, the orange color represents demand in the Sacramento River Basin, which includes the American River, for all licensed and appropriative rights. These are the post-1914 rights. And the other colors, the sort of Dijon mustard color, are the pre-1914 demands, and then the yellow color is the riparian demands, okay? So the block colors represent demand in the system. The blue line, the blue squiggly line at the bottom, ignore the dashed lines for a moment. The blue squiggly line at the bottom is the supply. That is unimpaired flow in the Sacramento River Basin as of that time period. And that's, as you can see, the blue squiggly line exists from about March 1st through about May 1st, okay? The dashed lines are kind of projections of where that unimpaired flow might go. And the State Water Board used this chart to say, hey, look, water rights holders, there is not enough supply to meet the demands of all of these water rights holders. Even by May 1st, there wasn't enough water to meet the demands associated with permitted and licensed rights. Now, if you go to the next slide, this is sort of an expanded version or a blown up version of what we just saw, and it's also a little bit later in time. What you don't see here is any orange, and that's because if you look at the vertical purple line in the middle of the screen, that purple line says that in June of that year, for a combined Sacramento-San Joaquin River Basin, the blue squiggly line that crosses the blue line means that there is not water for any licensed or appropriative right. All of them were curtailed by June 1st, going all the way back to 1903. So the district received curtailment notices from the State Water Board for some of its more junior rights. But those that have priority dates prior to 1903, well, we were in that Dijon mustard color that we're still authorized to divert. Now, one thing we noticed at the time was that, notwithstanding whatever the State Water Resources Control Board said, we knew that some of our more junior rights were just not there. Permit 2112 is a good example of this, where we just didn't have, by that point in time, there was just not much water to divert under that priority of right, okay? So this just gives you an idea of how the State Water Board administers these rights during times of scarcity. It will look at the supply, as depicted by the blue squiggly line, the unimpaired flow in the rivers, compared with the demand of all the 17 or 20,000 individual water rights in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Basin, and it'll try and make these judgments on who should be curtailed and when. Next slide, please. So going back to how we met our demands, if you look at the 2015, the pie chart on the right, during that same period, for the depictions, the two charts that you just saw, this is what, this was how we met our demands, with a major usage from our South Fork American River water rights, and then Sly Park really cutting back a little bit. Director Anzini, you have a question? Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a duplication of the slide that you've already seen.
Oh, okay.
So you've already seen this slide. I just wanted to highlight
Yeah, I was
for
trying
you
to
in the presentation. So I cut and pasted this.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry
I
about
just didn't
that.
want to look at a fish.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, that's my Delta smelt. Let's go to the next
It's
slide.
your smelt.
So, we've talked about the challenges associated with drought and scarcity. And now I want to talk about another challenge that the district deals with, and this is the multiple, associated with the Bay Delta. This picture, I don't actually know if this is a Delta smelt. I think I found this picture on the internet somewhere many years ago, and I thought, well, I have seen a Delta smelt, and that looks an awful lot like it. So, so this is to reflect species, one of the cornerstone or keystone species of the Delta, which has been really in a lot of trouble for a long time. Next slide, please. It is a topic of conversation. This slide is busy, and you don't need to know the details here. On the right, on the upper right, this is a depiction of the Delta. The Bay Delta is where the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River flow together and then out to the ocean. And that area is formed, there's thousands of channels and streams and sloughs and everything else. And it provides a habitat for a number of species, including species that are in significant decline. And those declines are represented in the graphs that you see on the rest of the slide. So in the upper left-hand corner, again, I know this is small, don't worry about the details, but notice the trend of fall-run Chinook salmon spawning populations in the Sacramento River, and they go from high to low. Simply stated. And the same is true if you look on the bottom slide, the Sacramento winter run Chinook salmon. Over time, we've seen those populations really crash. On the right side, the same trend exists for the Delta smelt, and I'm not sure if it's shown on here, but yeah, these are just Delta smelt abundance charts, but there are other species of smelt, the longfin smelt, which has experienced a similar decline. These declines have resulted in a number of drastic actions. If you go to the next slide, I won't talk in any detail about the Federal Endangered Species Act, but the state, and because this has been much in the news recently, the federal government is having to try and operate its export facilities to get water to Southern California to meet needs there, while at the same time adhering to biological opinions and that are informed by science associated with endangered species abundance that make it very difficult for the federal government to meet those two objectives there. So, but separate and apart from Delta exports, I wanted to highlight, how does this relate to EID? And the first bullet point says Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. We talked about how the State Water Resources Control Board administers water rights. What we haven't talked about is how the State Water Resources Control Board also administers water quality laws, including the Federal Clean Water Act. And under the state equivalent of the Federal Clean Water Act, the State Water Resources Control Board is required to protect water quality in the waters throughout the state. It does that by adopting what are known as water quality control plans. And by far, in my opinion, the most complicated is the one in the Delta. In the mid-teens, the State Water Resources Control Board said, hey, water users, we have to update our water quality control plan, and we think that it's high time all water users throughout the state contribute to meeting the flow objectives necessary to protect in-stream beneficial uses, primarily those species that are in decline. Historically, that is an obligation that has fallen largely on the most junior water rights holders. And so since that time, the State Water Board has been engaged in the update of its Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan and in analyzing various ways of requiring water users throughout the entire state to leave water in the river, what it's called the unimpaired flow approach. The district has been heavily engaged in this, and we will talk in much more detail at a later date, but I want to highlight for you because this is a significant challenge that the district and everyone else, virtually everyone else in the state is dealing with right now.
Brian, is this also saltwater intrusion? Is it covered under this?
It is related because because the water quality objectives in the Bay Delta, they deal with all kinds of I'll call them pollutants, including the salt water from the ocean that comes in and out of the Delta. And where that line is between the salt water that comes in and out with the tides and so forth, as it moves higher into the system because there's not enough water moving down, it can have impacts on species, and that is a major contributor to the
And ag, right?
and agriculture. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So beyond the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, there have been many proposals over the years to build a facility to pump water north of the Delta and around the Delta to address some of the impacts on species that are associated with the existing exporting facilities, which are located really in the heart, just to the south of the heart of the Delta. And those proposals have been known by many names. Originally, it was the Peripheral Canal from the 1980s. It has morphed several times, and the most recent iteration is called the Delta Conveyance Project. Effectively, it would build tunnels to go around the Delta. This will have significant impacts, and that this is another forum in which the district is engaged to make sure that whatever happens, whatever's constructed down there, there aren't diverted impacts upstream to water users like the district. Next slide, please. So we've talked about challenges. I wanted to just highlight some opportunities for you. The first is with regard to our permit 20112. You heard from Elizabeth Leeper at the last board meeting, an update on our project to add a point of diversion upstream to permit 20112. This would allow us to take water that we currently have a right to take at Folsom. We will take it there and at our upstream Kybers point of diversion so that it can be utilized, next slide, more widely throughout the district's service area, not just to supply water to the service area shaded in green, but also to those areas that are shaded in red or pink and yellow. Next slide. Another opportunity is with regard to water transfers. I talked a little bit about water transfers when I was talking about the characteristics associated with water rights, but let me just expand on that for a moment. A water transfer is the sale of the right to use water from one water rights holder to another. It is not the sale of the water right itself, it's the right to use the water associated with the right. They can be temporary or they can be permanent. They can be short-term or long-term, and they're generally accomplished through one of the means that I've listed there. For us, just to keep it brief, we accomplish water transfers by releasing water that we would otherwise keep in storage and allow someone else to use that water when necessary and when it's available. Next slide shows you a table of when the district has conducted a water transfer, how much water we sent in acre feet or in that particular year, along with the cost per acre foot and then the total. Now, a note about water transfers here is that they are highly variable. It depends on not just hydrology, is there sufficient water, but also is there even the capacity to move water from where it is to where it wants to be, if you will. Sometimes we have the water and we don't have there's not room in the export facilities to move water. Sometimes there's room in the export facilities, but we decide, you know what, to play it safe, we're gonna limit ourselves to a certain amount of water to make sure that we have sufficient water to meet the demands of our own customers. So there's a lot of factors involved, but I wanted to just mention that. Next slide, please. A couple of just sort of legal points here that I wanted to make is that transfers must involve wet water. What does that, not just paper water? You might hear this term paper water. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that a right must be perfected before before it becomes transferable. Perfected means that you must have used the water, put the water to beneficial use for the purposes identified in that right until the water is transferable, and that's to avoid speculation, right? The state has recognized that, hey, it's not a good idea to, provide a means whereby someone can just go out and obtain a water right and then immediately transfer it and make money without ever having used it for beneficial use. That's called speculation, or the use of paper water, which is prohibited. Next slide, please. And then water rights are subject to the no injury rule. By changing your operation, one of the inherent characteristics of a right, remember a right has an inherent characteristic, a purpose of use and a place of use. Okay, if you change one of those things, you can do that, but you can't injure other water right holders in the process. Neither can you injure in-stream beneficial uses. Okay, next slide. And then we talked about, utilizing the conveyance capacity of other facilities, such as the Delta export facilities. When we use those facilities to accomplish a transfer, we are subject to terms and conditions associated with the owners and operators of those facilities, which has its own challenges. We will talk at some future point in more detail about what those are. Next slide. And then finally, I just wanted to note that transfers are never conducted without certain protections and assurances. The Water Code itself provides protection to water transferors in that it says that at the conclusion of the term of the water transfer, all rights associated with that particular transaction revert to the owner, right? So we don't give up anything statutorily when we transfer water, and that should provide some assurance to our own constituents who say, hey, you're selling water out of county, what's going on, right? That water is fully protected by statute, and it is also protected by the terms and conditions of the purchase and sale agreements that we negotiated. The bottom bullet point is language extracted that I literally cut and pasted from one of our water transfer agreements. And it says, at any point in time, we maintain the discretion to say, hey, you know what? I know we said we're going to transfer you X amount and you agreed to pay for it, but we decided we need that water for our own customers. So, we're off the hook, okay? All right, the final opportunity here before we conclude is with regard to regional collaboration. I have, this picture shows what is the Upper American supershed, if you will. This includes the South Fork American River, the Middle Fork, the North Fork, and the tributaries there too. And I showed this not to highlight any of the particular subtext, but just to reflect that the district is currently and will continue to be engaged with many of its regional partners, both water agencies, environmental groups, business entities, land use authorities, and so forth, to ensure that we're all collaborating with one another in order to maximize our water portfolios. If you go to the next slide here, as an example of this regional collaboration, one of the entities with whom we are virtually in constant work with is the Sacramento Regional Water Authority. The Regional Water Authority is comprised of, I'm not sure how many members, but it's mostly water agencies in the larger Sacramento area. It is engaged in a number of activities, some of which I've highlighted here, such as the Sacramento Groundwater Bank. This is establishing an opportunity to recharge the groundwater basin by providing surface water to entities without access to surface water in times of surplus, so that they don't have to pump groundwater. That way, groundwater levels come up, and then in dry times when there's not enough surface water to go around, then we can safely rely on that groundwater to meet demands. This is something that the district is just in the early stages of exploring. Is there an opportunity for us to participate there or not? There are other initiatives that I've listed here with which we engage with the Regional Water Authority, but I won't go into any detail on those. Next slide, please. And then another entity, and the last one that I'll talk about today, is the Sacramento Water Forum. In the year 2000, the district signed the Water Forum Agreement, and this was agreement that was negotiated between within the larger Lower American River watershed between water agencies, environmental groups, like the Sierra Club and Save the River and so forth, and business entities, as I said, land use authorities and so forth. All these entities came together and they said, hey, let's create as co-equal goals the providing a reliable supply of water to our to meet the future demands of our residents and also protecting the river, in particular the Lower American River. So what does the water forum do? It engages in habitat restoration. The picture on the right shows a dump truck dumping gravel into the river to create spawning habitat for salmon. It's a little bit more than just gravel, but for our purposes. They do this every year to great success, and we're very lucky to have the water forum doing that work. They also do scientific work on flow management. What kind of flow do these species require? And then they engage in science and monitoring. And the district participates in that. So those are some opportunities. And that, thank you for bearing with me, concludes my report to the board on water rights. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them now.
Thank you, Brian, for taking a complex topic and making it understandable for us. Board comments, questions?
Yeah, more of a comment. When I first started, it was drummed into me that the water rights, and in particular the pre-1914 water rights, were sacrosanct and etched in stone, couldn't be touched. But we've since come to learn that that's technically not true. Theoretically, and not that they're likely to do it, but theoretically the state legislature could change our water rights system and upend everything. And of course, that would be fought and litigated, but they could do that theoretically. So that's why we can't just sit back and say, oh, we've got it, don't have to worry about it. We have to keep being active and pursuing and protecting them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Director Day, and we'll talk in more detail about legislation, but in recent times, we've seen a number of attempts to amend the water code to really drastically change water rights for lots of reasons, many of which are political, but we have to engage on that. And so far, the last few years at least, we've been somewhat successful in maintaining the protections that exist for us today, but we have to be vigilant, so I agree.
Director Anzini?
Thank you for this long presentation, but it's worth getting a refreshment in your mind of what is actually going and what is happening. And I appreciate the fact that we're going to put this slide in all of the social medias so that people can watch it and entertain their own information regarding water issues. This is not going to go away, and it's going to be a big effort at our to make sure that we keep informed and inform those lobbyists that we hire that this is most important for us, and to value the fact that we are one of the oldest water agencies that there are in the state of California. And just as a side note, because it's really important that people pay attention to the Delta. And right now, Klamath River has been undammed. And I can tell by truth, because I have a piece of property up in Humboldt, that the Eel River, for the very first time in many years, with the amount of water that's come in this last two months, the Eel River is having coho salmon at least 40 miles up the Eel River now. Now, that's one of the rare rivers that flows north. But there's coho salmon literally coming into the streams up there. And that's the first time in probably 40 years.
Well, it sounds like
Yeah,
I need to-
don't
I
tell
need-
Brian
I need
that.
to
He's
get my-
going to take his rod up there right now.
I have a
wrap
house
this
you
up.
can stay at.
Thank you. Any other board?
Sure. This presentation, I know how insane water rights issues are. It is to help clarity, so I appreciate the work you put into it. In fact, I had a conversation last week with Felicia Marcus, who used to be the chair of the State Water Resource Control Board and was the region EPA administrator. We used to, just kind of catching up with her in my new position. And having gone through this presentation made me have a much better conversation with her because I could speak with a little bit of authority or, context. So she's been involved in the Healthy Rivers and the forming the voluntary agreement. So again, I appreciate it. And I appreciate also the other board members bring up, potential threats to the water law. We just have to stay vigilant on that. Based on the most current Supreme Court ruling, what navigable waters do we have in the district?
Yeah, good question. The Supreme Court ruling in Sackett versus EPA, it had the effect of narrowing the definition of what constitutes waters of the United States. Prior to that, there was case law and guidance issued by the Environmental Protection Agency, which largely extended the reach of waters of the United States so broadly that it included, for example, the mud puddle example, where it was a water that was not physically connected or to a surface water body. That was narrowed in Sackett so that waters of the United States, the Supreme Court read the statute and it said, when Congress enacted the Clean Water Act and it defined the waters to which the Clean Water Act would be applicable, and it said those waters are navigable waters, and that navigable waters means waters of the United States, Congress did not envision that would include mud puddles that are not physically connected. And so the effect of the Sackett case was to narrow the streams with the water bodies, I should say, with which or to which the definition of waters of the United States applies. And so, it is all waters that have a physical surface water connection to navigable waters. And so I realize that is clear as mud, literally, but it had a more dramatic effect on areas, lowlands where there are wetlands and tidal marshes and things of this nature. For us, where we're geographically located, I don't think the definition or the constraints that the Supreme Court put on the definition of waters of the United States, I don't think it really changed significantly how we had previously interpreted or how our regional Army Corps of Engineers interpreted that section of the Clean Water Act. So I can't tell you which rivers are and which rivers aren't waters of the United States, but it is broadly applied, and I think for the most part hasn't really changed that much for us. I'm kind of looking for Brian Deason to see if he agrees with my interpretation, but
But Cable, Silver, all
Yes.
the rest of those are considered
Yes.
navigable waters, right?
yes, South Fork American River, all of the streams that we divert water from. Yeah, even, like I said, even the little trickles that come down off the mountainside into those rivers still constitute waters of the United States.
And currently, how much of an impact are riparian rights being exercised in the county?
So remember that in order to have a riparian right, one must be physically adjacent to the water. You cannot use or establish a riparian right to divert water from a river and apply it on a parcel that is not physically connected to the water body. So what that means is that, in terms of large-scale use, I mean, it's really just, there are diverters. I mean, if you float down the South Fork American River, you could see, little diversions to water grass and, water lawns and things like that. But there's no large-scale agricultural diversions that come, as far that I'm aware of, that are established by riparian rights. Now, that is primarily what is relied upon in the Delta. Riparian rights are heavily relied upon in the Delta, where, as you saw from the map, there's all kinds of channels and streams and sloughs, and the property owners there can utilize riparian rights for those purposes.
Yeah, Placer County has a fair number a lot of, I remember looking at property there, and there was a creek going by, and the Realtor was explaining that we had X number of minor inches if we were to purchase that property that you could use to irrigate it. It was like 5 acres. And so that was kind of interesting way back then, learning about that. But it's more flat there, and just local creeks and whatnot.
Guess I'm gonna have to go back and watch Chinatown again.
Yeah, do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one quick question that kind of leads into a comment. You talked about the beneficial uses that underpin some of these water rights. Those can be agriculture, hydroelectric uses. If the practical use ebbs and flows based on demand, for example, maybe agricultural use becomes residential consumptive use, does that put the water right in any kind of jeopardy in the same way that lack of use would put it in jeopardy?
No, as I said, water rights can change. For water rights that are more junior, the permitted and licensed rights, there's a process that you have to go through. So, for example, if the purpose of use is for irrigation and you want to change it to domestic, there's a process whereby you can submit a petition to change the water right to add residential or domestic use to the right. As I said, it's subject to the no injury rule and some of these other things, but it wouldn't be subject to a reduction in the face value necessarily. Now, for pre-14 rights, there's also an opportunity. You can make changes to pre-14 rights so long as you're not increasing beyond the original amount. And there's a little bit less process, but also subject to the same rules of no injury and so forth. Well, similar rules.
Well, Brian, thank you again for a great presentation. My takeaways from this, from a high level, are that in big round numbers, that our supply availability via all the water rights ranges from 50 to 80,000 acre feet, depending on the wet year, dry year. And our demand is someplace between 30 and 45,000 acre feet. So we are fortunate to have sufficient water rights, even in an extended dry years, to cover our projected demand. And I think as we pursue additional diversions and things, that'll even put us in a better position. Right now, the county water agency is pursuing water rights for an additional 40,000 acre feet, which are not only for EID's service area, but for the entire county. Our topography makes that a little difficult. But how do you see that playing out, the request for or application for another 40,000 acre feet?
Yeah, good question. Obtaining water rights is not easy, particularly nowadays, and particularly because of some of what I've characterized as challenges. Those being primarily that water rights are oversubscribed. I mean, they are in most years, not all years, because California's hydrologic cycle is quite variable, and so in certain years there's water that's available for appropriation, but in virtually all other years, someone is junior to the rights that are required to meet senior demands. So, the water agency is its intentions are laudable, and obtaining additional supplies for future growth in the county, particularly outside of the areas that are currently served or planned to be served by entities like ours, is laudable. As you said, there's some challenges there. But in obtaining that right, they will have to go through the gauntlet that is the State Water Resources Control Board, and lots of folks will have an opportunity to object and say, "Hey, this isn't necessary," and so forth. It'll be challenging to demonstrate, a reasonable plan for beneficial use of that water and so forth. So, so there are some challenges, I think, ahead for that.
Thank you. I think all the board members know that we did submit a letter, a comment letter on that project, and basically don't agree. Jim, can you explain?
I would just, just a word of caution, you know, that is a particular project that it wasn't envisioned to be within the scope of today's discussion. So
Yes.
I do want us to be careful not to veer too far into, you know, into discussion on that because, you know, I imagine the public that would be engaged or that would like to be engaged in that wasn't notified in advance that we'd be talking about it. This is what the Brown Act is for. So but yes, we, not to cut Jim off, and Jim, certainly feel free to respond as long as it's, you know, narrow and brief and related to our today's agenda.
Well, Brian, I'm a short timer. I can get away with it. No. Just wanted to clarify one thing. The application is up to 40,000 acre feet. There's contractual limitations that reduces that significantly. So they have a lot of challenges, and we won't go any further than that. The other item I'd like to highlight, and I'm really glad Brian added this to the presentation, is the regional partnership with the Forum and the Regional Water Authority is critical for our success as well. And there's kind of subsets of that we work with particular agencies. Like we work very well with Placer County Water Agency because they're very similar to us. And the Water Caucus down the hill, Brian participates in that. So I'm glad you added those slides to the presentation because there's strength in numbers, and we use that a lot.
Thank you. Before we move on, is there any public comment on this item?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item number 8, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Dwyer, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on information item number 8. I believe we're ready to move on.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to information item number 9, information technology, the Hanson update. Aaron, you're on.
Aaron Kennedy, your Information Technology Director, giving an update on the Hanson project, which has been ongoing since actually 2018 is when the project really started to begin in earnest. There we go. So I'm not going to read all of this, but the project really began in 2017 and 2018 with preparatory work and research. Came to the board the first time in 2019 for the development of the RFP and do the research on this project. Had an update in February 2021, and then March 22nd of 2021, the actual full project came to the board, where we came to you asking for, really in total, about a little over $10 million for this project. Again, 2021. Through October, we had another update asking to add Selectron Technologies, which was IVR or Integrated Voice Recorder as part of the project. And then an update was done by myself in October 2023, talking about the status of the project, where we were going to need to extend the timeline and had asked for additional funding to continue the project to its completion. June 10th of 2024, we talked about the CDR phase CIS, Customer Information Phase, going live and where we were at that point, and now we're to today, giving you the update as to where we are right now. Just a couple quick definitions of the phases. We had the foundation phase, which was preparatory portion, documentation, getting everybody lined up. CMMS, which is Computerized Maintenance and Management System, i.e. work orders. CIS, or Customer Information System, the billing and payments. CDR is Community Development and Regulation or Development Services. So we have completed the last major milestone, which is the CDR phase. It went live Tuesday, November 12th. We had no significant issues. That one actually went very, very well. Putting that delay in when I talked about in October of 2023, where we were delaying some of the portions, really helped clean up the project so that we could really focus and just get pieces done. First with CIS and then finally CDR. That is the final module of the project. We do have some minor milestones, one of which is doing an update, not an upgrade, but an update to the software. So while we've been installing this, we have not been updating every single version because that slows development down, so we've been spacing them out. Last one was just before CIS go live, which was a year ago, so we now have an update to do. Actually, end of February, 1st of March, we'll be doing that. And then there's small little adjustments, so things that we have come in after we begin using the product to go, this is how we designed it to work. Now that we've actually used it, we need to make some tweaks and adjustments, so that's what we're working on right now. And then the big piece is the project is on schedule as we had just talked about in 2023, and we are within budget. For those that weren't here, and as a reminder to the public, this was the original project timeline, where it was originally hoped that the entire project, other than post-go-live support, would have been done October 2023. As I said, in October, I came to you saying that wasn't going to happen. We can go to the next slide. So this is the actual project timeline. The foundation phases took a little bit longer than original, and if you notice, we didn't actually start in March. We didn't start till May, so that started some delays immediately. CMMS took a little longer. CIS ended up being very complex and taking some time. Part of that real reason is the same people who were working on the CMMS worked on CIS and also worked on CDR. To be frank, it was just too much at once, so by really phasing them out, it worked better, and we were able to complete them a little bit better. But as I said, in November, we did get this live as we had intended, and with very little impacts. And matter of fact, most people didn't even notice we switched over. It was that seamless. Just a quick highlight, and again, this is very, very high level. We have quite a number of improvements, but in CMMS, CIS, and CDR, really it was improving our records keeping and documentation software management, and then really understanding what we do. The system before kept records, and it was good. We now have a system where we can do projections. We can see what we have, see what it looks like. So for like in CMMS, that one is, because it's been live for now a year and a half, 2 years, we really see projections, equipment, life cycles to where we can go. If we continue this trend, this will have to be replaced or need major work now. And that really does a lot of our input into all of these C's. CIP, thank you very much, I almost said it wrong. CIP planning for multi-year, not just the 5-year that gets presented to the board and the public, but really 20, 30 years of trying to look at maintenance and schedules and asset inventory and management. CIS, one of the things for customer service, as a customer service representative, so when you call in, what used to take 5 to 7 clicks and multiple pages to get information for a customer when they were asking about, for example, one of the most common ones is, how come my bill is so much now when it's this, and they can now look at trends? It shows up much faster. It shows up actually in the first summary page to let them know what their bills are and were. So that really helps reduce the amount of time on a call to help some of our members. And I don't want to get too much into it because I know next month or next meeting, Jenny Downing is going to be here giving you some more details, but just some highlights here. And then CDR, which has really only gone live a couple of months, they've already noticed improved reports and less number of steps that it used to take to do some of the work. The next one. I wanted to put a picture up here, but I didn't have enough time to get everyone. But realistically, across this project, we had almost 60 staff members working on this at different points in time. Really, that's a significant number of staff actually working on getting this done. But I did want to highlight a couple of people specifically. We had Jenny Downing and Srinivasan. They were very key on there, but we also had our core team, which included like Jason Ide and some of the other staff. And I knew as soon as I didn't write down everybody's name, I was going to forget half of them. So my apologies to everyone I didn't forget, but really we had a core group of people that have been working on it this entire time since 2018, about 6-7 people. And then by extension, different portions of the time. Up to around 60 people were working on this. And that's significant when we have 230 staff members to look at, really a quarter of the staff were working on this. So it really took a lot of effort, and I just wanted to thank everyone for it. I'm just here making sure it keeps moving. They really got all the work done. And then a quick summary, in totality between the different times we've asked for funding, we've asked for a total of $11,408,537. Total spend as of January is just over 10 million. It was 10,001,000 something dollars, so I just went 10 million. To complete the remaining tasks between capitalized labor and contracts that have not yet been paid out because work is continuing on. We estimate about 300,000 to complete it, which should be in mid-2025, so a few months from now. So that leaves, if we do quick math, we estimate that we will be under budget by $1 million when complete and closed. So we ended up not actually needing that additional money I thought we would, but projections weren't looking so good then. We were able to really turn around and put effort back in to just get this back to where we wanted it to be. Questions?
Thank you, Aaron, for your report on this. Digital output is really important for all people who put their hands on the computer, including the employees. And I think that the phases, and I've implemented these myself, but when you phase it in with the end users for their understanding on what is going to benefit them to make the screens faster and get that information out is the most important thing. But technology changes every month. And so I hope the board understands that, yeah, it's expensive, but in order to keep up with that information and making sure you have the keys and the locks secured for customer information, that it is important that the staff knows how it operates well. And it's not an instant thing over. I've seen CIS projects take 4 to 5 years for implementation. And then you just end up, it's kind of like building the Golden Gate Bridge. You got to start at the beginning and move back up. So I appreciate that control of staff being very flexible on how this works. And I am looking forward to the customer billing process next month, as you well know. But appreciations.
Thank you. Yes, Director Day.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate you on bringing it in substantially under budget. It's very good. And now, I know probably next month you're going to come to us, because we have to start it all over again, right? It's already out of date?
No, not out of date, but we will be getting the financial system, so that one is in our CIP project, and we'll be going forward, but not part of this presentation.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
Other comments?
Thank you.
Well, I'll echo, the key measures of any project are on budget and on time. You met the below-budget milestone, and I think it was wise to extend the time period to do it right, and that was good. You didn't mention it, but we also had the complications of COVID at the very beginning of the project, which caused a lot of issues. So thank you and the team, the 60 people that pulled this off, and we're looking forward to the next phase.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Any public comment on this information item?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item number 9, please refer to the instructions in today's agenda. President Dwyer, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 9.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's move to action item number 10.
And actually, President Dwyer, I was remiss in the beginning of the meeting to mention that we're actually we're asking the board to consider action items 10 and 11 concurrently. We'll take separate action, but there'll be one PowerPoint for both action item 10 and action item 11. So we just ask that you consider it together, though it'll be separate action.
Okay, good, thank you. As part of the exercising of our water rights, and we have to comply with the FERC requirements, and sometimes those are a little onerous, but I think these next two items will talk about that. Dan, go ahead.
Great, thank you, President Dwyer, members of the board, good morning. I realize in reflecting on the presentation this weekend, it's been a while since I've had my own presentation, so thank you for allowing me to be back up here today. As the clerk to the board, Sullivan, had mentioned, we have a couple different projects we're asking to be funded today, and it's a joint combination between the Operations Engineering Department and General Manager asked I do the presentation for you since I've been through it all since the beginning of the FERC license. A little institutional knowledge here. Next slide, please. So as President Dwyer mentioned, the main topic of discussion today will be the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license. That is the federal license overseeing our operation of our hydroelectric project. And every year that we ask the board to provide funding for certain licensing requirements. Most recently, we were here in February of last year. And then, of course, last October, the board approved its most recent CIP. As with every project, we're here today to ask for funding of a few projects within the FERC requirements, as well as one additional project for our wastewater group prior to proceeding with work on those projects. Okay, so we'll be specifically talking about a number, I believe about 4 or 5 FERC licensed projects. These are projects that were obligated by various licensing agencies that have discretionary authority over the hydroelectric project. Some of those were also included in our settlement agreement to actually acquire the FERC license that involved a multitude of agencies, counties, NGOs, nonprofit group organization, a wide array across all interest groups. And then we have one other project for engineering. Because we were up here anyways, just thought I'd take an opportunity to highlight our collections rehab project as well. Next slide. So the question of the day is, why in the heck does the district capitalize FERC license requirements? Intuitively at first, it might not seem readily evident, but if you actually, the best analogy that I've described to people is similar to any other capital project. We're doing an environmental review, a CEQA review, or permitting. This is just another licensing obligation, another project obligation as part of that process. So the actual tangible asset in this case is the FERC license. So in theory, the license could be sold, transferred, et cetera. We're also required to do a number of improvements to those projects. Thank you. I feel like that's going to fall off. To our district facilities as part of the FERC license, and we've made those over the years, and the board has reported to you. Separate and apart from those, we have ongoing monitoring requirements, or in some case, enhancing other facilities, namely the Forest Service and their assets across the forest that we've reported to you as well. Both of those are considered intangible assets, so they're not our assets, right? This approach, we actually codified that back. Hard to believe. Back in 2006, we had a call with the Government Accounting Standards Board, who sets those standards for general accepted financial practices. You can tell I'm talking a little out of course, so Jamie will probably have to correct me here. But we met with them in 2006 and described that process and received their concurrence to proceed with capitalization in the way that we've done for the past 2 decades since that time. Next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly run through the projects. First slide, I believe, is our water temperature monitoring. Next slide. So this is, we were originally required in 24 project locations throughout all of our reservoirs and stream reaches to monitor. Since that time, staff led by Mr. Deason over here, we were able to reduce that to only 11 sites, but we continue to monitor those stream reaches to make sure that our project operations don't have a detrimental effect to water temperature. This is one of the various charts that Brian would be able to describe to you. And that's our own Doug Venable on the right, which looks pretty if you look in the foreground, but if you look in the background, that's actually ice flock trees. So it wasn't quite as warm as it looked that day when he was out there in short sleeves. Next slide, please. Next is our noxious weed monitoring. So on the National Forest System across the U.S. are very focused on monitoring noxious weed populations. And there's actually 14 different highly invasive species that we're monitoring for across the forest to make sure that our project operations, our vehicle, our construction equipment doesn't get in there and cause even more weeds to break out. There's another set of 27 additional species, but there's the 14 most that we're monitoring on a regular basis. One of those efforts that we do that might not seem quite intuitive is we're actually required before we bring in large equipment to steam clean, effectively get all the noxious weed seeds off our equipment before we bring that on Forest Service lands. So just another thing that we do every day as part of our operations of the project. Right, exactly. The next requirement is our adaptive management program, and that is really the catch-all umbrella where we do our agency and stakeholder annual outreach, our monitoring program every year in March. We meet with those groups, and then we have various reports that are submitted in April through June, I believe, each year. So that's an ongoing effort. It's primarily a small portion of the many things that Brian Deason does on an annual basis. Next slide, please. Next one is, you probably remember this one from last year, is our pesticide use plan. And so this is a targeted, focused application primarily of herbicides along various locations to help noxious weed control, as well as to ensure safe operations of facility. And the slide that we show you here is actually the canal bench. So you can imagine the importance of being able to look for burrowing rodents, seeps, or other things that could potentially lead to a catastrophic failure of the canal bench if not observed. So we'll be doing our regular maintenance there, as well as up at Lake Aloha, burrowing rodents and trees that will grow in our dam up there is another annual task each September. Next slide. Yes, as well. This is fire protection as well. It's another one. Okay, and then I believe the last on the FERC is our transportation system management plan. This is one of many, probably something like 24 plans, I believe, that we initially developed, and is our obligation to maintain set standards for how we maintain roads on Forest Service lands primarily, and then also on district lands to access and maintain the hydroelectric projects. So the two areas that we're focusing on this year is the Camp 2 project, which is just at the downstream end of how we access the Mildable Tunnel and Spillway 20, very important access road, as well as various little feeder roads along Bullion Bend just up the road here. Next slide, please. And then we have one project in wastewater since we're here and for the engineering department as well, and that is our annual collection rehabilitation. So mind going to the next slide, please, Jen? Just some capital labor to keep efforts going, and that we provide two highlighted projects here. The photo on the left is one of the cure-in-place pipe lining projects we talked about, and Liz and her staff lead those. This particular project was at Camino Heights, but I thought it's large enough to really give a nice visual that the liner slipped in place and then cured in for some of the old aging pipes. That's just one way to try to reduce the cost of extending the life of infrastructure. And then on the right, that's one of, you can see actually our manhole riser was sheared off during one of those really significant storms about 4 or 5 years ago. So finding those locations in the system sort of are weak points to help guard against high flows and maintain the integrity of the sewer collection system. Okay, next slide. So I get to read two options to you. So the first one we'll take up is, oh, sorry.
So the first option he'll read is for action item number 10. So I suggest that we go ahead and take a first and a second, ask for public comment, call for the vote. We'll move to the next slide. But at that time, you can call for public comment for action item 10 and 11.
Can I ask a couple questions prior?
So before we do that, Danny, you need to read the option 1 and then we'll get a first.
I think we're figuring out the parliamentary steps right now.
Okay,
so.
and actually, the slides are incorrect. This is actually action item number 11. So what I'm going to do is I will read the option for action item number 10 and the option for action item number 11. And we could have questions before a first and a second, but no comments until after.
Okay, so Dan, do we have experience of noxious weeds basically getting a foothold?
Yeah, and do you want to have, I'm just making sure I'm following.
Yeah, as long as there are questions, sure.
Absolutely, yes. And not all are project related us, but nevertheless, we have an obligation to maintain them. I think the annual reporting is maintained by Mr. Deason, so I think he'll give you one of the most recent examples where we did have a control effort, so.
Good morning, Brian Deason, Environmental Resources Supervisor for the district. And Director Penn, if you could restate your question, or
I'm just saying, what has been our experience, and I'm gonna load the next question in there. What's been our experience with noxious weeds encountered, whether we brought them in or they were, brought in by other means, and then what sort of pesticides are we using?
got it? Yep. Oh, great. I appreciate that. So maybe just to set some context, noxious weeds, what does it take to earn that distinguished title, right? So
There are 10 most wanted, not wanted?
Indeed there are, yeah. So noxious weeds are different from either non-native plants or invasive weeds in that they can actually cause harm to agriculture, livestock, or just ecosystems in general. So it's a very focused list. Dan has described that we've got 14 that we're on the lookout for. In our most recent monitoring, we found 7 within our FERC project boundary. Just for context, we map all the noxious weed occurrences throughout the project area. This past year, we mapped about a half an acre in total. That's out of over 2,000 acres within our boundary. So it represents a very small proportion of the area. 10 years ago, we mapped over 2.5 acres. So we are seeing a reduction in time through operations treatment efforts, as well as the equipment cleaning that Dan described. And I'd be happy to, I don't have the chemical list.
When we meet separately, you can.
I'd be happy to go through the integrated pest management plan with you.
Thank you.
Yellow star thistle is one of our bigger contenders, rush skeleton weed, barbed goat grass. So,
It would be nice to have a copy of all those pictures on our website. If you have these in,
We can-
pull them out.
that's all right. We can make that happen.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. You alluded to it at the very end, the IPM, the Integrated Pest Management Program, which I think is very important that you're making all these decisions for what materials we use in a science-based fashion, the mapping, the categorization, so we can match the best materials that balance effectiveness on the target pest, but worker safety, customer safety, all those negative externalities, we can find the best balance there, yeah.
I always think as soon as you drive past the Sly Park Road and you see both shoulders lined with Scotch brome, which is another one, and that's a classic example. But yeah, the IPMP, Integrated Pest Management Plan, working in coordination with our pest control advisor, limit the target use chemicals, ensure that obviously our drinking water is always protected, so.
So are we on, is this number 10, Jennifer? Is this option 1 for number 10, or is that 11?
This is for number 10.
Okay.
For the order, because for the members of the public participating online, he'll read option 1 for action item number 10. We'll take a first and a second.
Right.
Then we'll have him read the options for action item number 11. We'll take a first and a second. Then President Dwyer will call for public comment for both items.
Okay.
So for action, just to be clear, this is option 1 for action item number 10.
Yep, great. Great, thank you, Jen. All right, so option one is to authorize project funding in amounts of $65,000 for capitalized labor and $7,000 for equipment and supplies for a total funding request of $72,000 for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Condition 15 Pesticide Use Project, project number 07010H, and $115,000 for capitalized labor and $270,000 for equipment and materials for a total funding request of $385,000 for the FERC Condition 57 Transportation System Management Plan, project number 07030H.
Do I have a motion?
I'll move option one.
Thank you, Director Day.
Second.
Thank you, Paul.
And
Any public comment?
We'll do a first and a second for action item number 11, and then if we could call for
Oh,
public
thank you.
comment
Yeah,
concurrently.
yeah, already forgot.
It's okay, that's what I'm here for.
Okay, now the second item is item number 11. Option one is to authorize project funding in the amounts of $30,000 for professional services and $10,000 in capitalized labor for a total funding request of $40,000 for Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Condition 37.8 Water Temperature Monitoring, project number 06021H, $30,000 for professional services and $5,000 in capitalized labor for a total funding request of $35,000 for FERC Condition 44 Noxious Weed Monitoring, project number 08025H, $35,000 in capitalized labor for FERC Condition 38 Adaptive Management, project number 07011H, and $20,000 for capitalized labor for 2014 Collections Pipeline Replacement and Rehabilitation Project, project number 24008.01.
And it's 2024 collections, not 2014.
Oh, boy, you could tell I'm in the past.
Just 10 years off. It's okay. So do I have a motion?
I'll move one.
Thank you, Director
second.
Day. Thank you. Any public comment on either of these motions?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action items number 10 or 11, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Dwyer, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 10, option 1, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Penn, nor any public comment on action item number 11, option 1, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Mansfield. We are going to call the vote now for action item number 10 only.
Okay. Please vote on action item number 10. Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll call for the vote on action item number 11, option 1.
correction, can I ask a question before we vote on that?
Sure.
I just want clarification, because the first item has a total funding, the second item doesn't have a total funding. Is that 55,000?
So if, for the, which one are you talking?
Item 10 has a total funding of 385,000.
Okay, so,
Item 11 does not have a total sum, unless I manually put it down.
okay, so for action item number 10, we have it broken down, 65,000 for capitalized labor and 7,000 for equipment for a total funding request for that particular project.
I already know that. Is the item 11 summary?
Okay.
That's what I just want
So
clarification.
which one are you talking
Very
about?
bottom, option 1, total amount is 35,000, 30,000, 20,000. That makes it 75,000. 30.
There's just no summary.
There's just no summary there. I look at that all the time, so.
So just just, if I could maybe just draw your attention to, there's only a summary when there's a request for two separate funding amounts for the same project. So for example, on item 11, the very first project, there's a funding request of $30,000 for professional services and $10,000 for something else, for a total of $40,000. On the very last item, it says $10,000 for capitalized, the $20,000 for capitalized labor is not combined with the $30,000 because that $30,000 relates to a different project, and therefore they're not combined for a total funding request.
There's two total fundings within that statement.
Okay, so that's fine, it doesn't change my vote. So, I just trying to get clarification that we be consistent on how these things are identified for me, for my need. Thank you.
It's a lot of information, and we try to present it the best that we can.
I
But
understand.
understandably,
Okay.
I also get confused at times.
Okay.
If you're not confused, you're not listening.
Yeah,
Ready for a vote?
On action item number 11, option 1, moved by, just for clarification, action item number 11, option 1, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Mansfield. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, now we will adjourn to closed session. Council, do you have a time estimate?
Yeah, thank you, President Dwyer. The board will meet in closed session to discuss the matter which is agendized today as closed session item A. And I anticipate the board's discussion of this will require at least 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
So we won't return prior to 11:50. It could be after. For the purposes of this Zoom, the Zoom will be shut down and resume once the board reconvenes, not prior to 11:50, however, it could be after.
Okay, we'll reconvene the board meeting at 12:31. Anything to report out of closed session, council?
Thank you, President Dwyer. The board met and provided direction to staff, but took no reportable action.
Thank you. In that case, are there any assignments, Jennifer, for next week, next meeting?
We had several directions of staff on our communications item. So I will assure you that I have them all written down. 1 from Director Mansfield, 3 from Director Penn, 1 from Director Anzini, and 1 from Director Dwyer. Would you like me to review them, or are we comfortable with that?
Okay, thank you very much. Any other board comments? Okay, meeting adjourned.
12:32.
Thank you. Thank you all.